What's up, Kim? Sorry to hear that your first week of school has sucked so much, apparently. Uh, I can imagine that it would be the case taking art classes in such a structured environment because, it seems like it stifles creativity. But hopefully, once you get beyond these, I guess, intro classes, that it'll become easier for you to really get into your own artistic niche and move out of these stupid assignments. Um, but don't let it get to you. Just pedal through it, and hopefully after the semester you'll have some better professors that are more open to the creative process or something along those lines. But anyways, about morality, I really admire your courage, I guess you could say, for attempting to tackle that issue because in this day and age, morality is so up in the air. Um, there are so many different ideals of what's moral and what's not. For example, our government is waging war in Iraq. Most of the world finds that act to have been and to continue to be quite immoral and destructive, whereas President Bush finds it to be almost, the will of God that we ought to democratize the Middle East, which in a sense is just an extension of the the idea of the Crusades and the Christianization of the world carried over from the Middle Ages to the modern age. Um, and we call ourselves a secular society, and we're certainly more secular than we have been in the past, but still we're using the same religious emotional motivations to go about trying to save the world, but we're saving the world um, in a very, what's the word, the judgments that we make about what it means to be saved and what the good life actually is are something built into our culture that don't necessarily have a reflection in Middle Eastern culture, for example. But we're forcing our understanding of the universe onto them. And certainly for things like the equal treatment of women in the public sphere, it's difficult to restrain ourselves from really lashing out at some of the religious governments that beat women for minor transgressions of religious law. Uh, that makes me angry. But at the same time, is it worth it to kill hundreds of thousands of people to fix that problem? Is that how you fix the problem? I don't think so. But again, we're at war right now, and where we as a country and as a global political entity, we're really struggling to understand what good is. Um, and in some sense, it's a philosophical, intellectual question, but in other senses, it's an emotional question. And it's so ambiguous to try to tie these two together. Moral relativism is becoming more and more popular these days just because of the difficulty of these issues. To have a universal moral system that applies to all individual situations is difficult because what is it based on? In the past, even the greatest philosophers have had to rely on some transcendental notion of God-given ability that humans have borrowed from their creator to know what is good. Um, Kant had this idea of moral autonomy that we should not rely, as many did in the Middle Ages, on literal interpretation of Scripture and the Ten Commandments and whatnot to know what was good and what was bad, but we must use our conscience or our moral will to restrain our base desires from doing immoral things. Um, but I think our modern scientific understanding of the human organism contradicts that notion of moral autonomy, um, because when we talk about morality, we're talking about normativity, which just means that people raised in a community of others develop similar understandings of appropriate behavior, and that therefore to have an autonomous normative understanding of behavior is difficult, because if your autonomous behavior is a product of the community that raised you, how are you to be truly autonomous? You're just a product of your cultural context, right? So it's difficult to hold those two ideas of morality and autonomy together, at least for me. Kant was able to do it because he relied on God to have implanted the conscience or moral will into our experience of the world. But can we really do that anymore? I don't know. I try not to take a side in all of this because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But in some sense, I think we do need a notion of God to have a universal morality. And I don't mean the biblical God or a literalist interpretation of God as, the cosmic grandfather or the king of the universe or anything. I mean something more, in a metaphorical way, God as the metaphysical ground of being, which maybe we could call love, that which connects all people and provides conscience, my understanding and ability to empathize with your condition, to see your perspective and to value your perspective as much as I value my own. But at the same time, valuing your perspective doesn't necessarily mean I don't think my perspective is better or more moral, right? Because if I value a murderer's perspective because, oh, well, he was raised in an unfortunate circumstance, his normative community, the context in which he grew up was so such a put such a limit on his ability to understand other people's perspectives. And he grew up in a ghetto and he had no money, he didn't get a good education, so I understand why he murders people. We can't really say that. We have to be able to say that murder is wrong, and I'm going to have to take away your rights and put you in jail because you might murder more people. So my phone's ringing. I'll leave it at that. Let me know what you think. Thanks for listening.